Alright guys, so today I'm going to tell you the blueprint of how to become a native level in a language as an adult. So like most people think this is impossible. How can you possibly become native level in a language if you were not born to the language? If you were not exposed to it as a baby, if you blah blah blah, right? Well, there have been people that have achieved native levels in languages, as a second language, as an adult, through specific methods, right? Now, what is this, right? So, like a little thing about myself is, I know French and Japanese. Now, with French, my accent is pretty much perfect, right? My intonation might be off with French, but that just comes with like more practice, right? And because for me, like I never use French, so like it's hard. But when I was in France like a month ago, like it was reaching close to perfection. But my vocabulary is not native, so that's the thing. So with French, I might sound like a native, like I might have a perfect accent, but I'm sometimes I make grammatical errors because like I'm just not accustomed to the language yet, and my vocabulary is nowhere near native because there's a lot of words that I don't know in French. So with French, that's there, right? Now Japanese, right? Japanese is the one that's really close to native level right now with me. So for me, you know, in terms of like my pronunciation, um, it's it's pretty much almost perfect, right? And you guys can look at my old videos. I think the video where I made like the final update of learning Japanese through immersion, like that video, if it's like one of the first videos, I speak entirely in Japanese like for the first hour. Now my Japanese has improved since then, but like that's kind of like a rough estimate of like where my accent's at, right? So in terms of my accent in Japanese, it's like pretty much almost perfect. Um, Now with Japanese, in terms of the accent, it's there, but what really makes me really close to native level in Japanese is actually my vocabulary. So um, I have a very high vocabulary in Japanese, right? I The amount of vocabulary in words I know has surpassed my mom, who's a native. So my mom's a native speaker of Japanese, and she went to the highest, hardest high school of Kobe, right? Um, so even for someone like her, like I know words that she doesn't know, right? And even my grandpa, right, who's a Japanese linguist, right? My Japanese grandpa is a world-renowned linguist, Masayoshi Shibatani, right? And even him, like, he was impressed by the amount of words that I knew, right? Like, even for someone like him, like, he was like, there's no way that, like, you know, a 19-year-old kid, like, only knows this much about the language of Japanese. And I learned it within 2 years. So I reached a level that was higher than most natives in 2 years. Like, how's this possible? It's like, dude, it's like natives spend their entire lives in the language. How come I was able to surpass like most of them, right, in just 2 years? Well, I'm about to explain. I'm gonna give you the blueprint, right? So the first part is the accent, right, and the vocabulary. So what makes you native in a language, guys, is your accent, right, which is like how good your accent is, like hatsuon, right, and then your vocabulary. So goryoku, you know. So that's the difference. So there's the accent, the accent, the pronunciation, right? In French, it would be la prononciation, tu vois, and then la, le vocabulaire en français, tu vois. So in French, it'll be like vocabulary and accent. So this is like how you would reach native level, right? So with me, right, with what I've been doing is if you want to achieve a perfect accent in French or Japanese, right, kind of like what I did, you have to mainly focus on listening. So you have to spend. I recommend the blueprint would be to spend the first 2 to 3 years, in the language, immersing through listening. So you're going to immerse in the language by just listening to language. Okay, you're just going to listen to the language. All right, and you're going to learn new words through listening. And I know it's gonna be hard because I'm telling you not to read, but if you want a perfect accent, this is how you do it, guys. All right. In French, I hardly read. I only listen to French YouTube videos and French people speaking. It's actually, for me, in French, it's easier for me to listen to French people speak than it is for me to read a phrase, right, in French, right? Because for me, like I spend so much time, like so much more time listening to French than reading that my reading speed in French is not that fast. Whereas like, So like when I listen to French, it's like a lot easier for me to understand. So like for me, my listening is actually like easier than my reading. And if you want a perfect accent, it's gonna have to be like this, like at least in the beginning, right? So that's why I recommend it, because reading can actually inhibit your ability to get a perfect accent. And it's not just about like can you fix it later? It's like it's not about that. It's like by literally knowing too much of the knowledge of reading, right? By knowing the conscious knowledge of words and grammar too early on before you allow your ears to bloom, it could inhibit you from having a perfect accent. Because having a perfect accent is not just about your grammar vocabulary. It's about how well your ears are able to pick up on the exact sounds of the language. And sometimes when you know too much reading, when you can read too much and you know too much of the language consciously, it could inhibit your ear's ability to bloom and achieve that native-like level of accent. Because remember, if you want a perfect accent, which comes from your mouth, you have to make sure you're able to hear everything, because you won't be able to produce anything that you can't hear. So the foundation for a perfect accent comes from the ears. So these right here are the keys to unlocking a perfect accent, which comes from your mouth. It's this, all right? And that's why I recommend you guys only listen and don't do any reading for the first couple years of your language learning, because this is going to allow you to get a perfect accent, all right? That's what happened to me in French, happened to me in Japanese. Now let's circle back to Japanese, right? After you do this, after you reach pretty much like basic fluency, maybe like conversational fluency, where like you can understand like TV shows, and anime like at 95%, maybe 96%, of like, of course, like daily it doesn't have to be hard anime. Like if you don't understand 100% of hard anime, that's fine, because we're gonna get into it. But just with the easy anime, or at least with easy everyday conversations, if you can understand like 99%, then you're ready to move on to this next step. Because once you have the perfect accent, right? Now we just need to reach native-like vocabulary. Because remember, there's two parts to being a native. There's the accent and there's vocabulary. So with vocabulary, guess what you guys are going to do? Yes, you guys are going to read. Now you guys, wait, what? You told me to avoid reading for 2 to 3 years, and now you're telling me to do like all I'm going to do is read? Yes. So I'm going to pick up some books here. So these are like Japanese books, right? Guys, by the way, like Classroom Elite, like is so goated. Like you guys don't understand. Like this shit, bro. It's like get good, bro. Like you want to get really good in Japanese? That's how you do it, bro. You read this shit, all right? But anyway, so what I did in Japanese was, so with French, yeah. So you want to basically focus on only listening. Basically, don't avoid reading at all costs, okay? For the first like years, right? And this is just so, like I said, for you to unlock your ears, right? Because remember, this is the key to a perfect accent. Most people don't have a perfect accent, not because of the way their mouth is formed when they're an adult and they can't produce the sounds. No, it's because their ears are not tuned in yet. Their brain has not decoded enough ears and sounds for them to be able to hear the sounds of the language, if you guys know what I mean. And the key to unlocking this is to only focus on listening and watching content in the language. Don't do any reading, right? But once you reach a perfect accent and you want to increase your vocabulary and reach a native-like vocabulary, kind of like I did with Japanese, then you're going to do a lot of reading. Now, here's the genius behind this. Any reading that you do is not going to inhibit your accent, okay? Any reading that you do, like, because here's the thing. You already developed perfect ears and perfect accent first, before you went to reading, so that any amount of reading that you do will not hurt your accent. But if you did a lot of this in the beginning, before you developed the accent, you would never have a perfect accent, right? Because if you do too much of this, it's going to hinder the development of this. Remember, this right here is everything. If you want a perfect accent, this is where it's at, guys. Doing too much of this in the beginning is going to hinder this. So we first do this before we do this. You guys understand? So, and this is the way babies do it. Like, if you look at, how you learned English, if you're a native speaker, like, you first learned English, through listening alone. You became fluent in the language through listening alone, being completely illiterate, and then you went to school and learned how to read. You learned how to read in school once you were already fluent in the spoken language. This is how babies learn it. Like, why don't you, like, you guys have to learn like this. Like, why are you guys trying to like, focus on reading and grammar drills and vocabulary like in the beginning? Like, why you guys like? I don't get why the school system. I don't get why the school system like does that. The natural way to learn it in the natural order of things is to first do listening and then read, because that's how a native learns their language. They only become literate and learn how to read once they're already fluent in the language in terms of like conversation. So that's what I'm having you have here. That's what I'm making you do here. Okay, you focus on listening for the first couple years, get fluent like conversationally, and then if you want to increase your vocabulary to surpass a native or even like native like, then you focus on reading. All right. Now, with reading, the advice is simple: to just read a fuck ton. Like, I read a ton of books. Like, I probably read over like 100 volumes of light novels in Japanese, right? I mean, I have like a list of all the books I've read in Japanese, but it's close to like 100 volumes of specifically light novels, right? And that's not counting manga, like, at all. Like, that's not counting manga, but that's just counting books, right? Just counting these, right? These words here, just books, no pictures. I've read like at least like 100 volumes, and that's how I was able to achieve vocabulary higher than my mom, right? Who's a native speaker, was because of this, right? I just read a lot. Like, you guys want to increase your vocabulary? Like, read. Like, that's how you do it, guys. You know what I mean? Like I'm not sugarcoating this, and for me, like, I'm really close to a native. Like, I mean, I think for me, I've never really lived in Japan, right? So that's the only thing that's holding my Japanese ability back. So even though I may have like a perfect accent, right, in terms of like my pronunciation, and I may have like native like vocabulary, like even like surpass most natives in terms of vocabulary, what's holding me back from being a complete native is just I'm not living there, right? It's only until I live in Japan, right, and actually immerse myself in the Japanese culture for like a year or like 2 years. If I spend like 2 years in the language, I mean, if I spend 2 years living in Japan, and talk to Japanese people, make Japanese friends, then I'll be pretty much native, right? Because, right now my brain is mainly functioning off of English, right? Because I'm in the US, right? Even if I watch a ton of anime and read a ton of books, like my brain in terms of my output and speaking abilities are still, it's still like, I'm still programmed in English right now, right? When I was in France, my brain was in French. Like, I actually, was weird because it's like, I would speak better French than English when I was over there. Like when I was speaking like French, like I was struggling to speak English, like a little bit. Like, it was like a little bit slower. I was like, oh my god, this is weird, because like my brain was like completely in French. Because remember, I was only immersing myself in French. Like, there was like no English, right? And all my family members were like French. I was speaking to my French cousins. Like, literally, my entire brain was in French. All right, so like, when I was like over there, I was like, what the heck? I can't even speak English. Like, I was like, oh my god, it was like so slow. Like, when I was trying to speak English, I was like, oh, what the heck is going on? Like, it just felt weird. Like, even with my dad, I was speaking to my dad in French, like completely. And like, for him, it's like, it's actually easier for him to speak French than English because he's like a French native speaker. So like, it was actually easier to speak to my dad in his own language in French than it was for English. So like, this tells you that, when it comes to languages, like, your brain has a certain mode. For me, at least, like, I have a mode in English and I have like a mode in French. So if I spend a month in France, like, my brain will be completely in French mode. And if I spend time here, then my brain is going to be completely in English mode. Which means that if I have to live in Japan, right, for a couple years, then my brain will be in Japanese mode. Do you guys understand? And then once you're in that Japanese mode, then speaking will become like super rapid, like super, like you'll be speaking like a native, pretty much. Like, you'll be completely fluent, right? And I think that's like the one thing that's holding me back from reaching that native level is just living there. I just gotta live there, right? But I have the basics though. I have the accent and I have the vocabulary, right? And right now, like, the words I'm learning, in terms of the words I'm learning in Japanese right now, like, it's like extremely rare words. Like, the words that don't like come up at like that much. Like, they're either gonna be literary words or words that natives know but like don't come up often. So like, for example, like recently I learned the word for kanten, which is like basically like gelatin. It's like a gelatin protein. Like, do you guys know like the word for gelatin? It's like a protein. Yeah, I learned that word, kanten. I didn't know that word. I mean, but I guess I knew it. The other words I learned, there's other words I learned, like, seitaike. Like, seitaike is like ecosystem in Japanese. Like I didn't know that word. Like I was like, oh, this is actually kind of cool. Like seitaike. Like I didn't know the word for ecosystem. Like I knew the word for ecosystem in English, but like I guess it's like a more specialized word that like that I'm learning now. In terms of Japanese, like that's where it's at. I mean, right now I learned like what's another word, um, like I mean, like even when I read like Kingdom, like the manga Kingdom, like I was learning like super like ancient like vocabulary. I was learning like Joel Soul. So Joel Soul in Japanese actually means like when you're going up to the throne and you're like requesting a demand, right? And this word would only be used in like ancient historical mangas and historical fiction, right? Um, but that would be an example of like a word that I know. Like it's Joel, so it's like a verb, but it's when you go up to the throne and you ask the king for something, right? That's what it is. And I know things like chokume, like chokume is like meirei o suru koto, right? It means to like order someone to do something, command something. So like I'm at a point now where I know these words, which is like extremely rare words. You know what I mean? And for me, like any words that I do learn, like it's just gonna be like small little nitpicks, right? Um, yeah. So and I mainly did this by literally just consuming a ton of hard manga and hard light novels. So it's not just about consuming easy mangas, because if you just consume easy manga, like you're not gonna reach the level I'm at. Like if you want to actually if you want to reach the level I'm at, like you're gonna actually have to like consume like hardcore light novels, like no pictures, just words, and like hard manga. So things like Berserk, things like Vinland Saga, Kingdom, right? Like these are manga where like they have rare words. Like for example, in Berserk, I will learn the word for howa, which means saturation. It means like when something's like too saturated, like howa. Like this word is never used, guys. Like never used, bro. It's probably only used in like literary, like maybe like dissertations in college and essays, right? It'll be used. But like this word was used in Berserk, and I was like, oh dang. There's another word. There's another word in Berserk I learned. It's a itaki, like itaki, which means like a very like it means like enemy, right? But like a very like foreign, like it basically a threat, right? But this is like a word that's like very extremely literary. Like hardly anyone uses this word, and if it's used, it's only going to be used in like a setting, a fictional setting like Berserk, right? So if you want to reach the level I did, that's what I would do. I would read hard manga, and I would just read a bunch of books, right? And in terms of like the vocabulary, that's how you'd reach there. In terms of like, how to reach native vocabulary in a foreign language, like that's how you would do it. So if I wanted to achieve like native like vocabulary in French, I'm gonna have to probably like pick up some books, or at least like listen to like very sophisticated podcasts, like podcasts where they're speaking about very scientific topics, maybe like have like a professor speaking and use eloquent words like in French, right? Like I'm gonna have to listen to that type of stuff in order for me to ameliorate my French, if you guys know what I mean. But yeah, guys, that's the blueprint to reaching a native level, right? Step one, refine the accent. So avoid reading for the first couple years of your language learning. After you've perfected accent, then you focus on reading, reach the vocabulary of a native, and then go to the country and live there. And boom, you're native. You're native. And that's the order, guys. So the order is listening, then a ton of reading, right? And then go to the country and speak, right? And that's pretty much it, right? So yeah, and you have to do it this order. If you do the reading first before the listening, it won't work. It won't work, guys, okay? Because remember, this too early inhibits this from blooming, okay? You need to have your ears bloom, all right? So that's why we focus on this first before the reading. So yeah, guys, that's basically how I would do it. I don't think anyone's talking about this, how to reach a native level in a foreign language. But yeah, I'm pretty close with Japanese. So yeah. But for me, like like for me, I just have to like live in the country, right? Which I plan to do. Like Japan is a really cool place, guys. Like I've been to Japan like 6 times, 7 times probably in my entire life. Because I have family there. Like I'm half Japanese. My mom's Japanese. Like my entire like half my family's Japanese and half of my family's French. So I go to France and I go to Japan, and it's like so. Yeah, guys. It's a really cool place to live. I think, I don't like the work culture. Like, I don't want to work in Japan, right? But visiting, if I could find a way to, like, have an income elsewhere and then live in Japan, like, that would be amazing. you know, because Japan is just so like convenient and amazing. So I might actually live in Japan for a couple years. That might be like an endeavor I might do. Yeah. So other than that, guys, this this is it. This I guess that's all I have for today. And yeah, so that's the blueprint.